Hello, welcome to Property with a View. I'm Mike Harlow, and in this series of podcasts for and on behalf of the Digital Property Market Steering Group, we talk to leaders from across the property market about how conveyancing, both residential and commercial, works today and what we can do to make it simpler, less stressful, and more efficient. In this episode, I'm talking to somebody, though, who's not from the UK property market, but from Norway, because Norway is good. I mean, it's a beautiful country. It's an extraordinary coastline. I envy the person who had to go out there and map all of that. It's a country that's a little bit larger than the UK, but only has a population of 5.5 million, which is less than a tenth of the UK. And it also has seemingly a conveyancing process and therefore a property market that is highly enviable. And I'm joined today to talk about what that is, what the experience of buying and selling property in Norway is like, by Hannah Cook of, I'm going to mispronounce this, Kartverket, which is the Norwegian Mapping Authority that does, amongst other things, what Land Registry does, land registration. Welcome, Hannah. Thank you very much. You kindly also came over and talked at the conference that the Digital Property Market Steering Group did. But I want to take this opportunity to talk to you in more detail about how the Norwegian process works, what the experience is like, and how you got there, because I'm sure there are lots of people who would like to just follow the pattern. But first, a little bit about you. Tell us about your background and how you came to be doing this job, because you've got a lot of experience, I believe, in finance and banking, which has kind of been super helpful in your journey to get here.
Well, first of all, Mike, thank you so much for inviting me. And it was such a great experience of joining the UK last year as well, to see you kick off this really exciting journey. And it's a pleasure for us to actually share our experiences as well. Even though we started the same journey quite a few years ago, we're still not at the end goal and the ambition yet. So I'm hoping that you'll catch up and we can learn from you later on. But as for my background, I've been with the Norwegian Mapping Authority and heading up land registration for about 3 years. And before then, I've actually had a long career in consulting and the financial sector mainly, working in banking, both with IT and also with the personal market, which links onto property. I've had also a short stay working as a digital CDO for a large credit management company, knowing how technology works. And then I've also had the chance to work with the property industry before joining Kartverket. So this for me is a way to use all the experience from different parts of my background to try to move forward with Norway on the land registration part.
Wonderful. So let's get straight into it. If I'm, and we'll use a residential example, but I also want to talk about, what it's like to try and buy and sell commercial property in Norway as well. But the most kind of common, accessible comparison, I'm sure, is, buying and selling a home. So just tell me, what's the experience like? Just, if I'm selling or buying in everyday terms, what can I expect?
Well, first of all, most Norwegians own their own homes. So that means most of us have very sort of close personal relationship in buying and selling a home. And therefore, it's a process that people really have high expectations of. So if I want to sell my home, or even buy a home, I go to what we have as a real estate agent, which is slightly different from what you do in the UK. They do a lot more than marketing. They basically facilitate the whole process, including liaisons with surveyors and data collection, etc. And they put together a complete documentation, which for us is about 100 pages about the property. And then they put it on the market and they guide us through it. And as long as we fix the mortgage, everything works automatically, and land registration also is a part of that process. So as a house buyer or seller, I rely on the banks and the real estate agent and the land registration authority to collaborate to make this process work on its own. So all I have to do is to put my house up for sale, agree to the pictures, provide the necessary statements, and make sure I've got my mortgage sorted, and then sign the document once I've found a property I want.
So if I'm, let's say I'm interested in buying a property, the estate agency is on, I can see things online presumably, and I go and visit the property and I like it and I put an offer in. What would I expect in terms of time between then and being able to move in, all things being kind of, normal, equal?
Well, in Norway, the average time from you plan to sell your property until it's sold is 47 days, basically, from it's on the market.
Wow.
That's the market perspective. But you can actually buy and sell a property and move in within a week, depending on if people want to move out early or how that works. But technically, there's no reason why you can't do that in a week from the second you find a property till you actually take over.
So just to get that clear, because that sounded astounding. The average from planning, so thinking, right, I'm going to sell, to selling is 47 days. Yeah, do I understand that right? Okay, so
Yeah,
that's
usually we say if you take a normal process, just
yeah,
putting the sales prospect in order, having pictures taking, having the
yeah,
surveyor come, because we do all that up front to get all the documentation in order. If you plan for a month, that's more than enough, and then you can sell. But often, depending on region in Norway, some properties stay on the market longer or shorter, so you
yeah,
shorten
yeah,
plan for
yeah.
that, basically. But
But
yeah.
but if I mean, obviously, if you're asking a ridiculous price, then you're going to wait a long time, aren't you, for a buyer? But taking that kind of, how long does it actually take to find a buyer out of it? Basically, if you're you're going to find a buyer quickly because you're putting it on at a price to sell, you can expect a month to kind of get all the paper work, and we'll come to one whether it's really paper, but get all the information together. And then, so something like 2-3 weeks, it sounds, on average,
Yep.
thereafter, to the point where you've literally sold. I mean, that's not exchange of contracts. That's actually money in the bank, keys handed over. Yeah.
And land registration completed.
Wow. So that is a very different experience, and I know it's probably difficult for you for you to know. I don't know if you try to buy and sell property in the UK, but um, what difference does that make to the way people perceive and the way people behave in the property market? Because I noticed this when you came over and talked at the conference, and I also noticed that the Law Gazette picked up on this, which is one of our sort of professional magazines over here. When they said they were joking that they said your English was pearlescent, and they said, but the only thing you didn't seem to understand was the word chain, which is where we have people linking sales and purchases. And it's one of my kind of armchair theories that part of that is because we're anxious about the effort and time it takes to buy and sell. Therefore, if we're moving, in order not to feel like we're going to get fall in between two boats that are parting, and we're going to end up in the water, we end up trying to lash everything together. So I suppose I'm leading the witness a bit, but what is there a difference in terms of how people think about the ease of moving, which you think leads to sort of different behaviors in the market?
Well, As you said, I don't know too much about the UK property market, but my father lives in England, so I've watched his process of buying and selling from the sideline and was actually quite shocked about the documentation and the whole process he had to go through and how long it took compared to what we do here and how they had to wait for different instances. But I think for Norwegians, it's all to do with the only risk that we're basically stuck with is how quickly do we sell our own property. That's always a risk if you want to buy something new, and how do you wait it out in the meantime. But what we usually do up front is if we want to sell a property, most people would sell their property they have first and make sure that's settled. And also, you would also agree with your bank quite early that you can have a temporary financing arrangement if you have to wait to sell your own property
Right.
before you take over. And also, depending on how that works, you also agree a takeover date with the new property owners. And that's usually 3 months, but it could be a week and it could be 6 months, depending on what people agree. So that's where you have the managing of the risk is basically how long would you actually survive with that temporary financing. But given that the property market works quite quickly, as long as you talk to a real estate agent and they think there's a good time to sell, what the market's like, etc., it's basically a calculated risk where we can actually expect the turnover to move a lot faster than what I hear that you do in the UK. And that, of course, takes the risk down.
So that you don't therefore, I mean, you said people will try and arrange completion as one way of mitigating the risk, so that they arrange completion of the transaction for the same time. But are they therefore not contractually linking purchase and sale and purchase and sale, and because you can get chains that are really long here? No.
No, we don't usually do that. We sell our property and then we could if we buy that from one process, we can sell through a different real estate agent and have a separate process. So we can run this sort of as separate processes in many ways. Or you could, of course, talk to your real estate agent and link it if you want to and negotiate that. But normally people don't.
So let's then talk about it from the perspective of the buyer. If I see a property on the market, what can I see about it? I mean, obviously, I can see the pictures and go and have a look around it. But what other information can I see? Is it everything I would ever want to see and understand about the property, or might I still be, as the process carries on, might I still find out things that surprise me, make me worry about purchasing, or the price I've paid, or whatever? Yeah.
I think what you're pointing at there is one of the key differences between the way we run this in the Norwegian market and the UK market, because the public registers that we manage, we have a lot of information about the property, both the property boundaries, the property in itself, all the legal information about it in terms of title ownership, but also before you put a property on the market in Norway, you always have a surveying done up front. So all the technical information about the property is a part of the sales package. So you wouldn't put it on the market unless that is in place. And that means you have all the information about the technical standards, etc., to do with the property on top of the titles and everything. So you don't have to go through the process afterwards trying to get that documentation in place. And also, there's a very regulated area. So there's very strict requirements to what information needs to be in place so that you get the trust you need. And also, if there are any doubts, you also, as a seller, usually have to write a declaration stating that this is the information I know about it. So if there are any surprises, that would actually backfire on you as a seller as not coming forward with it. So basically, all the information you need is available by the time you go and look at the property. And some people today even just look at the property online with the digital internet scanning of it and then buy it from there because the documentation is in order. But most people like to touch and feel.
That's quite a lot of stuff to trawl through. In practice, do people really read that, or are there sort of services that offer some sort of digest or summary or risk assessment of that information?
Well, basically, it's quite standardized. So once you have a property, and if you read one piece of documentation, you could recognize it in the same standard and the same format throughout. And there are very specific things you look at. So the surveyors have their standards they follow. That's put into the real estate sort of pre-packaged for sales, and you know what to look for. There's always a summary, but you are advised to look at it, and you know what to look for, like, oh, be careful that there's no leakages or foundational damage, or if there's any red marks or flags that have been raised. So as long as you sort of skim through that, you don't need to understand all the technical details. But I think most people read through the most important parts of that documentation, because that is your legal document.
Yeah, and presumably after a while, once you've looked at a few, you kind of get familiar with how it's constructed, and what would concern you about a property. So if I can see a property, I can just look at it online, or go and see it as well. I make an offer. If I make an offer, does given that the amount of information that's available, does that then bind me, or can I still change my mind? When am I hooked in contractually?
Once you give an offer, it's actually a binding for the time frame. You usually say that this offer stands until the certain time or date or so on. But from that second, if it's accepted, it is a binding commitment. And then you can't opt out of it unless there are any specific contingencies that you actually put forward. But then you actually are obliged to buy the property, given all the information that was there.
And that's the law, right? So it's that, and so there was a. Has that always been the case in Norway, or was that something that was, because it's a system that depends upon the fairness of that being bound in, right? And it sounds like it's fair, because what else do you need to know? You're not going to find anything else out about the property, because I've given you ample opportunity to look around it and see it and read everything. I guess the only thing you haven't had is legal advice on, the sort of technical stuff, or have you? So if I'm a buyer, before I make an offer, do I get somebody to look over it and tell me whether I'm misunderstanding it or missing something? Or
Well, you can always take the sales package or the documentation there, including the surveying results, and go to somebody and saying, could you look at this? Is there something I should worry about? But usually these sales processes are quite quick. So if you're going
right.
to do that, you need to do it in a week, or the property you want might disappear. So
Yep.
but you can do that, but usually most people won't, unless there's something very specific, or if they know somebody who they can ask for advice. But apart from that, people usually manage this on their own. But I think that's also because the information is presented in a very readable way.
Okay, so there's even a standard for how it's presented, is it? It's not.
It's pretty standard, yes, with what
Yep.
needs to be presented, and also it's a standardized. Most of the real estate agencies use a system where all this is automatically uploaded into a standard format, and then they can do the marketing bit. They can write that part, but a lot of it is just sort of off-the-shelf, ready-made standard graphs and the way the technical summaries are done.
So I want to come on to how you got there, how you got the information in the process into that shape, but also the information into that shape to make it to make it work that well. Can I just ask about commercial property? Is there the same framework for the way the commercial property sales work? Is there the same requirement on upfront information, or is that sort of different for cultural or systemic reasons?
From our side, from a public sector side, basically, we have the same information available about commercial properties as we do for sort of residential properties. But in terms of the process, it's often a lot more money at stake if you buy commercial properties. And that means there might be more lawyers involved to make sure that goes through the way it does. And it also usually takes a bit longer to actually get those processes through. So you would probably find more legal involvement, and also more meetings between the parties in negotiations. basically
Yeah.
because the value and the size of the commercial
Yeah.
properties. But and also, of course, when it comes to farmland, etc., there are special regulations as well to preserve farmlands, etc. We need to cater for. But apart from that, a lot of the process is the same, but it's all about securing your investments, isn't it?
So the upfront information is as available, but it's not binding offers. It's more a kind of expression of interest and then a negotiation of what the purchase might look like.
Usually, you do have a binding offer once it's made, but it's usually a longer process
Right.
leading up to that.
Gotcha. Thank you. So how did you get here? So let's talk about the information, how and how that travels around the system, because you talked about a pack. Is it literally a paper scanned onto a system, or are we talking about standardized data that the banks can consume? Everyone can send around to each other. It doesn't matter who you're sending it from or to, because everyone's talking the same language digitally. How does it work?
Well, if you start with the registers that we have, all the information in our registers are digital available and linked up so the banks can actually consume that into their systems directly and look up the information they need, both for real estate agents and banks. So from that perspective, all that information is readily available. And also when the banks and real estate agents have their sort of support systems and their vendors, they use that as an integrated part to make sure the flow is as automatic as possible. And then you have surveyors, etc., that can put things into their system, and that is actually linked in automatically. Pictures are loaded automatically. So everything's tailored around the digital world in many ways. If you go back 20 years, it was much more paper-based. Now it's more digital on what you do. And all sort of marketing is basically online, where you can download the information automatically. So if you'd gone into a Norwegian website of selling properties, you'd be able to get all the information ready there. And you'd see that there's pretty similar standard setup in the way these pre-packaged sales information is put together. And also, I think the key thing as well that we've done in recent years, in the last 5 years, is actually do the automatic communication between bank and real estate agents, which facilitated the process a lot in many ways. And also for us at as around land registration, we used to have a very manual paper-based system. Then we had a parallel track. We could also use digital. And through the collaboration with real estate agents and the financial banking sector, we've now been able to actually fast track that process a lot more by exchanging more and more information digitally. So for us today, it's always been 2 days, a maximum time to do the land registration. But now it basically most of it happens digitally. About 70 to 75% is done automatically.
So that's the process of registering the change of ownership itself is sufficiently formulaic that you leave a computer to run an algorithm and update the register in 70-ish% of cases. So as soon as the application is received and verified, the register is up to date within seconds, I'm presuming from that.
Yeah, basically the system is that our deadline, whether it is electronic or manually, it has to be done it has to be registered the first day if we receive it before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the automatic registration happens both digitally and manually processed at 9 o'clock in the evening. And then we check it the second day, digitally or manually. And then everything's in place within 2 days. So this what slows us down. If people send us things via mail, the postal system is not what it used to be in Norway either. So that's the slowest part of the process if you choose to go the manual way.
Which I think is one of those sort of unintended consequences of digital information exchanges being so good, is actually at some point the mail suffers, right? So, but I guess it's a kind of relatively nice problem to have, because it means that the rest of it's working well. So what did it take to get everyone to work together in that way? Because what you're describing is something that works because everyone approaches it the same way. There is a standard pack of information that becomes therefore reliable and understandable. There is a standard way of communicating between surveyors and real estate agents and banks and land registry. How does that happen? Because in an organic and chaotic in the sort of mathematical sense society, those things they might evolve, but that it takes time and it's not guaranteed. How did you go about making that happen?
Well, I think sort of to answer that properly, you have to see Norway as a society as well, which is highly digital and has been for a long time, because every single part of the sector started digitalizing very early because prices and costs are high, especially labor costs. So therefore, and we're not too many people, so we need to use digital technology to actually make our processes more efficient. So all the banks have done a lot on the digital front many years, so the real estate brokers and real estate agents, and we did so the same at the Mapping Authority. So in 2017, we had to renew our system and make it sort of more up to speed with the new requirements. And then we done our part as well. But we realized that everybody had done everything they could on their own parts, but it didn't link together. And we couldn't get the benefits out any further because we relied on the others to do things. And we actually, basically the financial sector took initiative together with some of the public sector areas and said, listen, why don't we collaborate in a better way to actually see if we can make use of our experiences and align on how to do things in the same order and the same priorities, because then we might all get the benefits. So the unique thing about this collaboration, it's not government mandated. It is just basically all the different players in the market saying, listen, guys, so let's get together and sort this. And we don't have any legal obligations to sort it together. We just actually voluntarily sit down around the same room, around the same table and saying, agree on priorities. And sometimes that means we don't get what we want as fast as we want, but it's for the greater good and we get the main benefits out. And that's been the whole key to this success, is the collaboration with the Real Estate Association and the Finance Association to actually make this happen.
So is that the kind of kernel of your advice to us, if you like, as to how to make a difference? Because I don't know if you picked up when you came over or picked up before, but it's been more than 20 years that we've had the ambition of having what we would call e-conveyancing. Back in 2002, when an act was passed to enable electronic conveyancing, and there was this vision that it would all be done online, or through a connected system, and we're still attempting to realize that. It sounds to me like the kind of cornerstone of making it happen, where there's a will and the technology is able to support the process. The real kernel of it is getting people all to tackle the problem together in order, with the same shared vision. Is that the sort of...
Yeah, that is actually what we did, because we realized that working individually, we wouldn't get the benefits out of it. So it's all about joining forces and see if we want the same objectives. It's a lot easier working together to achieve them and everybody benefits. But I think sort of the other key to it, of course, it requires trust, because there's no legal obligation. So there's a lot of trust between the parties to make this happen. And I think the key factor to that made this work for us is actually because it's not as if we're trying to revolutionize things. We're saying, okay, let's be pragmatic about things. We have an ambition, we agree on what we want to do, we think this will be better for everybody, but where can we start? So we haven't said, let's rejig all systems and regulations and so on. We've said, okay, this is sort of the boundaries we have, these are parameters, these are a system, this is the legal setup. So what can we do within that boundary or those parameters to make this work? And then we did one step at the time and say, okay, let's start with this issue then, and doing it step by step. And because that way you can actually get benefits while you go, and you can also see that working together actually works, and you can learn to see, okay, did this work? Should we do it differently? So it's all about thinking big, starting small, and being a bit pragmatic to get results as you go.
Are you finished?
No, I don't think we'll ever finish.
So
Basically,
what's next? If it's on the marathon, I love the sort of, take it step by step, just keep going to the next water station and then and then see whether how much energy we've got left. But where on the marathon are you then?
well, we started with the residential area properties because we saw that was the biggest volume area and that was the greatest impact in many ways. And we still have a lot of different areas that are more specific that we want to tackle. So we're doing that step by step. But I think the big thing for us now to tackle together, and this involves even more players from both public sector and private sector, is we're actually trying to make it easier to inherit property and do property transactions through the legal system in that sense, because we find that today, even with property, it's very difficult for people to understand what is the value of the property, who owns it, how do we actually get the legal implications in place, and not only for property, but all the financial areas that are involved in when somebody is deceased and how you actually inherit things. So trying to make that system very easy for all the people in Norway to actually get the information they need as the first step, and then we can make the processes easy going forward. So that's the next big thing we're going to tackle.
That sounds, the implication of that is it sounds like you don't think there's an awful lot more of value that you can do to the sales process. So
Not to the sales process as such, but we still have the commercial area we need to do more in. We still have a lot of farmland properties we can do more in. There are a lot of other legal obligations related to property that we need to digitize. So we're still only at 70 to 75%, and the last 30% are going to be much more difficult to do. We've taken the big chunks, so now we have to tackle the small specific areas. And maybe at some point we also need to look at legal aspects of it and see if we need to change regulation, which is still ahead of us as well.
So what's the value of this? Has anyone assessed the benefits of the difference you've made in the last decade or whatever, to the economy, to the way people behave, any societal benefits that have been noticed or evidenced?
We actually estimated up front how much the value would be, sort of approximately based on all parties for society at large. And in Norwegian money, it's over 13 billion, which is equivalent of about £1 billion or something in our market. So I guess it's
Right.
10 times that for your market. And also it's time savings, a lot of time savings for all the different players and for consumers and property buyers and sellers. But also there's an environmental aspect because we don't transport paper around in cars anymore to send it between the players. So I think we've calculated that or estimated it's about 120 tons of paper or 1 million tons of paper that we will stop transporting around the system as well. So there are a lot of implications of doing this that reaches a lot further than we first expected.
So if you were to come over here and kind of tell us what to do, if you gathered everyone around in a big meeting room and said, right, the answer is do this, what would be the kind of 1, 2, 3 things that you would say we should focus on and make a difference with?
Oh, as I don't know the UK market well enough, it's a bit difficult to give you a very direct advice on that. But I think sort of it's all about a lot of people will always say, "Oh, that's impossible. This is really difficult to do, and we've tried it before and don't quite see the benefits, etc." So, at least in my experience, let's focus on the ones who want to try. Do a pilot. Let's see if we can start there and get somebody around the table who really want to try this, who want to do things differently, to see what can you actually get out of it. And once you have a showcase from that, maybe that will actually get the ball rolling to see, oh, and we can learn from it and we can tweak it. So I know that it's a very big market in the UK. So start with a few players and see what you can get out of it. And then you can move from there and see what the opportunity really is.
Thank you. And finally, can I just ask some really nerdy, if you like, questions about Norway and from a sort of mapping and land registration point of view? Because I love Norway. My father worked in Oslo for a bit, and I spent a bit of time over there skiing around Oslo. But I've become slightly weirdly obsessed by Svalbard, which is the set of islands way to the north of Norway. In fact, I think it's about as far north of Norway as the length of Norway itself, which is extraordinary. And the settlement nearest, I think it's kind of basically the settlement nearest the North or the South Pole in the whole of the world, I think, isn't it, basically? So, but is Norway fully mapped digitally? Is every last square inch of it registered? Is that not an issue?
Well, we have registered a big part of Norway, and we always keep having to go circles updating the data because it's never sort of up to date. We have to do it bit by bit. But I think Svalbard, we have a lot of mapping in place, and we collaborate with other public sector companies to do that as well. But I think the main area where we have the least mapping and we have the biggest gap is actually the Norwegian Sea, because that is larger than the land areas. So for us to actually get the sea totally mapped and the seabeds, and especially with the economy boosting and energy opportunities, etc., in the sea level, that's going to be the big thing. And also in terms of Svalbard, you might want to know that as the mapping authority, we're lucky enough to have an establishment also on Svalbard. We are responsible for all land mapping up there and or land registration in Svalbard. That was mandated 2 years ago, so we still have things to do. The settlements there are slightly different though, so it's a bit of a different job doing it. But also from the mapping authority's perspective, we have a Earth Observatory up in Svalbard that I was lucky enough to visit last year. So absolutely worth an experience if you get the chance to go to Svalbard. Would recommend it.
And it is the fact that it's a country of 1.25 times the square area, I think, of the UK, and less than a tenth of the population. Has that? Because some people have said to me, well, the comparison with Norway is not fair because it's so much easier when it's such a smaller country. I said, well, it's not. It must have. If you stretched out the coastline of Norway, it probably take you to the sun and back. It's extraordinary. So, is the scale of the landscape been a challenge in digitizing property information, or is that sort of overcome by aerial photography and all that modern technology?
Well, Norway is a challenge because we're not only that we have a long coastline which is very squiggly, but we've also got mountains and valleys, and we've got a lot of different areas. And what we've done is we've classified Norway in 4 parts, basically saying the city areas you need to be very accurate, but we can be less accurate when you come to mountain areas. And we think that's going to change. So it's probably going to take us time to use new technology to become more accurate and precise in mapping the rest of Norway. And also, what people don't think about often is that Norway is actually rising in some areas and we're moving eastwards. And so it's not a static world we live in either. So with GPS coordinates, we need to make sure we know where we are at any point in time as well. So quite an interesting world we're living in, especially when you come to one is land registration, but the other thing is when it comes to autonomous vehicles moving in, and how do we actually get that sorted as well? So Norway is not an easy country to map, even though we're smaller, but that means we have more remote areas and a lot of variation in challenges as well.
It sounds a delightful problem and a delightful place to visit. So, look, Hannah, thank you so much. It's an inspiration in so many ways, because it, as you say, it makes you not only think that there is a better way that could be really different and in a way that actually makes a difference to people's lives, not just, a marginal efficiency gain, but actually something that is truly transformative in the way that people experience moving property, to the point where they actually think of it differently. It's not just it saves them a bit of time or a bit of money, but they actually think of it differently. And I think the way you described how people perceive the risk on buying and selling shows that the absence of chains in the way that we have them shows that actually people end up, with a different perception of what it is to sell, and actually that impacts on their lives. And so I think, that's the prize. It's real in Norway, so it's not it's not theory, it's not imagined. But I also really inspired by your take pigeon steps. Take do it bit by bit, but make sure that everyone's walking with you, and working together, and that's very much what the whole ethos of what we're trying to do with a digital property market steering group. So thank you. Norway's an inspiration, and thank you so much. You've been an inspiration too for all that you've given to us, your time today and your time at the conference. It's very much appreciated.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you for inviting us to be part of your process. And if you at any point in time would like to come and visit us in Norway and visit our partners and see how this works in real life, you're more than welcome.
I will stop on the way to Svalbard, which is still an unfulfilled lifetime ambition, to go and spend a polar night, not the whole of the polar night, it's about 3 months, I think, isn't it? But I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Longyearbyen, is that right?
Anyway. That's very close to precise Norwegian even.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
This is Property with a View, available on all the usual platforms. Please do leave a review and a rating.